Good morning and welcome to the Dietitian on a Mission. My name is Janet Calderwood. I'm a registered dietitian. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you about relevant topics that involve nutrition and helping you live better. So thank you for tuning in today. I have a very dear friend and great registered dietitian in the house with me today. Jennifer Vargo is here, and you've seen her friendly face before. She's been on the show, and it's really delightful. Anytime I have the opportunity to have her here with me, it's a great privilege because she brings so much knowledge and expertise to the table for our viewers. So thank you for being here, Jennifer.
Thank you.
I think, you know, this topic is so relevant when we talk about all fats are not created equal, and that's what we're going to talk about today, cholesterol and different things that maybe you aren't familiar with that you should be more familiar with, because it can affect all of us.
Right.
And we know that heart-related illnesses are, in some cases, some of the leading killers in our country if we're not addressing and identifying some of the risk factors and doing something about it.
That's right. And when it comes to our cholesterol, it's not something that we can feel. It's not we can sense, gee, I think my triglycerides are high today. It's something that we have to have blood work in order to know where our levels are.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about, I think the first thing that we should identify is what really, when we talk about cholesterol, what are we talking about? What's going on with this?
Right. What exactly is cholesterol? So cholesterol is in the body and it has different roles. And maybe a simple way to even think about it too is that every single cell in our body, the wall that keeps that cell together, it's fat. So without having cholesterol in our body, we wouldn't have cell walls. We would cease to exist. It's impossible. So we have to have cholesterol.
Okay.
Cholesterol also affects our hormones. It also affects our vitamin D too.
I can definitely attest to that. Great.
So it's necessary, because sometimes I think what happens is that if a person may have high cholesterol, you know, the immediate perhaps thought process that might go through our mind is, oh my gosh, I've got to get rid of it. I need to get rid of this. But we need to have cholesterol in our body.
We need to have a certain amount, and then anything above and beyond what we need can be harmful to us. We know that cholesterol is manufactured in our livers, and then of course the accumulation of that can develop around a lot of where the blood flows through some of these arteries and form this plaque, which is, I think, really the biggest culprit and why we're so concerned about watching our cholesterol or watching the numbers, really.
That's it.
And so that, you know, that being said, I mean, I always like to tell people that when people have identifiable risk factors, some of those things can be modified, right? We know diet, and then certainly if people smoke, they can stop smoking. If they are doing any deleterious habit, that they could change those, and those could facilitate an improvement in their overall health. But there's some things you can't change.
Right. Sometimes it's genetic. Sometimes it's just, you know, it's just what we were blessed with, if you will.
Yeah.
That it's just the way it is. But it doesn't mean that not trying to make changes to our lifestyle won't have still positive effects on us. So it's still worth it.
So cholesterol is a substance that in many cases we do need for many bodily functions, and then the excess amount, or what we don't use, is stored, and it starts forming this plaque formation. I think that pretty much sums it up so that the viewers understand what it is, right?
Sure.
A waxy-like substance. You know, it's funny because many years ago when I was doing my dietetic internship, one of the privileges that I had was I got to be an onlooker of autopsies. And that sounds grim to some, but, you know, one of the ladies that was in her late 20s, we were doing an autopsy on her. I was just standing in the corner with the shield on so that nothing would come flying my way. I had the, you know, the gown on and everything. But we opened, the doctor opened this one lady up. She was probably 29, Jennifer, and she had so much cholesterol. They were trying to figure out the nature of her death. So much cholesterol around her heart, and it was like really slimy and greasy, and it was like a light yellow color.
Okay.
And so
Very
that's what it
interesting.
looks like. And that's
Yes.
when you know, it kind of makes sense when you eat foods that resemble
Right.
greasy type of things, that
Right.
that's actually
That
what
we-
it looks like.
Absolutely. And I think with that too, it's also important to point out that as much as we know that fats can contribute to our cholesterol, there's other foods too, such as carbohydrates, that can affect our cholesterol.
Yep.
There was a client that I was working with that I had the opportunity to work with him because his triglycerides were very high. They were over 500. And we got
Wow.
to talking. He was very active. He'd go to the gym on a regular basis. But he really loved bread.
Okay.
And at times he would eat a whole loaf of bread,
my
at
goodness.
least one loaf every weekend. And when we started to discuss that, well, when you're eating food and it's more nutrition than the body needs, the body has to figure out something to do with it, and it's going to store it. And it's going to store it as a source of fat. And as it's deciding to get to where the fat goes, it turns into this triglyceride to get there. And that's what was making his triglyceride level so high. So after having the conversation, he just stopped eating a loaf of bread on the weekend, and sure enough, his triglycerides did come down.
Wow. And so that's what we want to talk to you about today, are these different forms of fat, the triglycerides, the low density lipoproteins, the high density lipoproteins, the total cholesterol, and what these represent to you and what you can do about it. Because certainly there are many things that you can do differently as far as your diet goes. You know, there are other interventions too. For example, somebody that smokes, quitting smoking would be a big thing. And then recognizing that while Jennifer said, you know, not all dietary interventions may have the same effect, that if somebody was following the same heart-healthy type of lifestyle, diet, so forth, that one person may see a significant improvement in their efforts, and then the other person, unfortunately, whether they were blessed with bad genes, it may be all genetic and may be following the same type of strict diet, but not see the results that they're looking for.
Right. Sometimes
But
it
don't be afraid. You know, people say, well, I don't want to go on a statin, or I don't want to take a medication, but the most important thing of all is to control these levels, and that's what we're going to firstly address, is what is a standard level. So when we talk about this total cholesterol, this number that doctors like to see, what is an acceptable range?
The ideal is trying to have it below 200. That's the ideal as far as our total cholesterol goes.
Okay, and so total cholesterol should be about 200. Now, I know that a lot of physicians that recognize patients that have other morbid conditions may even be a little bit more restrictive with that too.
Absolutely.
Especially knowing that something like diabetes, for example, somebody that has a history with diabetes is already have a twofold increased risk for having a heart attack or stroke.
That's it.
So those may be a little bit tighter, but so total cholesterol numbers, when you're talking about what you're looking at a total number less than 200.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, what about when we talk about the LDL? Tell us a little bit, what does that mean and what type of cholesterol is that?
Okay. When we're talking about the LDL gets the title of quote unquote bad cholesterol. Another way that I help people to try to remember it, I think of it as lousy or lazy, because one of the things that LDL does is that when that number gets high, and what's high, anything above 100, because our goal is to try to keep it below 100, anything above 100, and it starts to get very lazy where it's leaving a little bit of plaque here and a little bit of plaque there. So that's why I think of it as kind of lazy. So we don't want that, because the more plaques that are being left around, the more it's going to fill up the arteries and potentially start to make it harder for blood to flow through there.
So the low density lipoprotein, or the LDL, the lousy or the lazy cholesterol that Jennifer referred, that's the one that, and sometimes people call it the bad cholesterol.
Right.
That's the bad one. That's
Right.
not one of the good ones. That's the bad one. But there's things that we can do for that. We're going to talk about it, but remembering that 100 is the number that you want to keep that under,
That's
below.
correct. Yes.
Okay.
That's
And
the
then
goal.
what about, we've heard the HDL. HDL, tell us about that one.
My HDL is my happy cholesterol.
Happy.
That's how I think of it.
Right.
So this is the only one that's very unique, because all the other numbers we're always talking about, it's some top number or we need to have it below, but HDL is unique because it's the one that we want to have at least 60 or greater. So this is one, but and the reason why it's happy, you can also think of it as a helper too, because where LDL is leaving behind all these plaques and deposits, if you will, this happy helper cholesterol is coming around and kind of cleaning up and making sure that there isn't debris left on in the arteries.
Like scavenging the free cholesterol from the
Yes,
arterial
yes.
wall. So the healthy cholesterol, the HDL, now you're saying 60 and above to be cardioprotective, to do
Right.
that, to have that benefit.
Yes.
And then, but usually the lower that number is, it's indicative of even an increased risk of having a cardiovascular event. So the higher the HDL, the better.
That's right.
Okay? I actually met a gentleman, believe it or not, recently. This is unheard of. His HDL was over 120.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I've never in all my years,
Wow.
I'm like, no, I don't believe it.
Do you know what his total cholesterol was?
It was 240, but
Okay.
his total cholesterol was 240.
But the HDL was as high as it is, which is another great point to be made, because when you talk about cholesterol, sometimes people just stop at what their total cholesterol is, but it's really important to understand what those other numbers are too. And if you don't understand what they mean, then when you go to see your doctor, ask, what do those numbers mean to me?
And the thing is, just as Jennifer said, so in this particular gentleman's case, the fact that his HDL, or that healthy, happy cholesterol, was so high at 120, that the proportion of healthy cholesterol to the unhealthy cholesterol, or the lousy cholesterol, was so significant that it actually didn't matter that his overall total cholesterol exceeded that 200 milligrams per
amazing.
deciliter range. So makes a big
Wow.
difference. I had never heard.
That's amazing.
I know, have you?
I'm blown away.
I told him, I'm
maybe
like,
an 80 or a 90,
80
but
or 90.
120.
120.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite something. So we know a little bit about the cholesterol. You mentioned triglycerides. Tell us a little bit about a triglyceride number. You mentioned that the gentleman that came to see you in your office, his was 500.
Right.
That's pretty high.
It is pretty high, because in the ideal is trying to have it 150 or less.
150 or less, right?
Yeah. So 500 was very high.
And again, the higher the numbers, the more fat we have floating around, right? Depositing, leaving things behind in the bloodstream, if you will. And then these can really cause heart attack, stroke, and lead to, just a debility that you can never recover from.
Yep.
In some cases you can, but I mean, the bottom line is, when you recognize there's something that you can do something, because ignoring it isn't going to help. Is it?
Oh, no,
Not
nothing,
at all.
nothing,
It's not
nothing
gonna
to
get
gain.
better. It's gonna get worse.
Exactly. There's something that you have to do proactively, and often it can be just simple little changes that we may have to make.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. So let's jump back to the triglycerides. If somebody is sitting here today and they're watching, they're, oh, gee, my triglycerides are up. What are some dietary steps that they can take to lower those triglycerides?
Okay. So like I gave the example of that gentleman that was doing a lot of bread, what he was doing was he was consuming too much carbohydrate for his body.
And there's a particular type of carbohydrate that can be really the culprit here. Isn't that
Yes,
correct?
That's correct, because when the carbohydrate is more simple, so here we're thinking about simple sources of carbohydrate could be like sugar, or even, for example, another culprit that can make the triglycerides go up is alcohol.
Alcohol
So
can
it's
do it.
very simple for the body to absorb and digest, and so it can get in the bloodstream very quickly and therefore make the triglycerides go up because of that.
So alcohol, and then the simple form of sugar, or even high fructose corn syrup. This is the one that you find in a lot of processed foods and things like that. So if you eat a lot of crackers and cookies and things that have a lot of added fats and sugars, in many cases, if people just lower their intake of those things, or refined grains, like you said, the white bread, they could have a huge improvement in that triglyceride number. Sometimes when someone's triglyceride numbers are really, really high, the doctor may put them on some real heavy doses of, like, omega-3 fatty acids, the DHA and the EPA, so that can help lower those triglycerides. But you can find those things, the DHA and EPA, in a lot of food sources, can't you?
That's right. That's right. Like when I'm talking to people about omega-3, I think most often what we think about is salmon. Salmon isn't just naturally rich in omega-3, though. It's rich because of the plant life that it's eating. So that's important to
marine
keep in mind.
algae.
Yeah, the marine algae. So our land animals can have the same thing. That's why when you go in the grocery store and you see that there's grass-fed beef or cage-free animals and eggs and things like this, that's why those become desirable, because the fat in those animal products can be different than if they're
Depending
not.
on what they're feeding them.
Yes, it's full circle. It's just what we do when we think about nourishing ourselves. We want the best nutrition, but we should be thinking about the same thing for the animals that we're choosing to eat too, or the products.
So anyway, the bottom line is certainly that there are many food sources that are high concentration of these omega-3 fatty acids that can be very helpful in lowering total triglyceride levels. And like I said, in some cases, physicians may opt to put their patients, if it's really out of whack, on something like a pharmaceutical grade omega-3 or something. But it's up, you got to work with your doctor on these things. But I always tell people, be a participator in your health. Don't expect to go to the doctor and put the burden on them. You're my doctor, I need you to tell me what to do. In many cases, people can take the initiative to correct some of this poor behavior on their own with diet.
Very true. And I think with omega-3 in particular, that's something that the more we're learning about it, the more you're seeing it appear on different food items that we're eating. So now we're seeing it on oatmeal because there's flaxseed that's added to it. Now we're seeing it in breads because there's chia seed in there. When we're enjoying walnuts.
Adding it to like orange juice and stuff.
Yes.
Omega-3 and this and that and the other. But the bottom line is the significant sources that you can find are still probably the oily fish, salmon, herring, the albacore tuna, things like this. And a lot of people have concerns still, right? We hear this all the time. Well, what about the mercury levels? Let's review that briefly about what is recommended.
Right.
I mean, because the pregnant people, the pregnant women, not people, but the pregnant people, that would be a concern, and little kids. But
Sure. But if you're not pregnant or if you're not a child, the benefit of getting the omega-3 versus the mercury, it pretty much outweighs it.
And I think a lot of the recommendations actually center around people changing up their seafood choices. Seafood is such a significant source of great protein, right? It's a great source of protein with lean protein sources and not a lot of calories. And then we have, we live in Southwest Florida, so we have great opportunities to consume so many different species of fish and shellfish. And which brings up another point, because a lot of concern for people that eat shellfish, like shrimp, for example. Well, shrimp has a lot of cholesterol in it. So let's talk about this. Where has science taken us. We used to recommend as dietitians, and it wasn't all that long ago, right?
Nope.
You've got to watch your intake of dietary cholesterol sources.
That's it.
But we know that that's not necessarily the case anymore, is it?
Right. Even the American Heart Association recognizes that now, that the effect on our cholesterol from cholesterol-rich foods, there's not that connect that we thought there was. However, we do see that the fat in the diet that we're eating, the saturated fat, the trans fats, those seem to be contributing more to the effect of our cholesterol than cholesterol actually does.
That's correct. And so when we think about eggs and things like that, it's not that, I mean, we want to recognize that, yes, there's a lot of key nutrients in eggs, which contain a lot of dietary cholesterol, like shrimp, but yet they're a great source of nutrients, and that saturated fat is the thing that we really need to be aware of, and we need to limit in our diet. And what is saturated fat?
So I think a great way to think about saturated fat is if it was at room temperature, it would be solid. So, for example, if we had a steak with all that marbling in it, and then we had olive oil sitting next to it, that's a great example of, well, that steak and all that white stuff in there, that's your saturated fat. When you look over and you see the bottle of oil and you see that it's a liquid, that's an example.
At room temperature.
At room temperature, that's your example of what an unsaturated fat is.
So the solid fats at room temperature, stick butter, stick margarine, Crisco, these types of things. Even, I'm going to throw this out and people are probably not going to like it, but we hear about, you know, coconut fat and these types of things. They're still saturated fats.
That's it.
And so while there are people that have some opinions that these are healthy plant-based fats, you know, the American Heart Association still cautions people, hey, we still know these are saturated fats, and we need to be mindful that these are the types of fat that can raise total cholesterol levels, the LDL, the lousy cholesterol, and we need to be very, very careful.
Right. And, you know, devil's advocate, the same is true about healthy fats. You know, we know that plant-based fats like walnuts and almonds and avocado, those are good for us. But when we take in an excess of these fats, they can still affect the cholesterol. And where, you know, if it's not only the cholesterol, it can also affect our weight too, where the body's only choice, hey, I don't have any use for this right now, we're going to go ahead and store it for you.
When you think about, you know, a lot of the fats, it's always something to bring up that a gram of fat has 9 calories. It's twice the energy that a carbohydrate or a protein would provide. So really, you're talking about a smaller amount that provides, you know, a significant amount of calories. So sometimes just by limiting that fat intake, you're limiting your calories too.
That's it.
And so for things that are even healthy, like nuts and olive oil, those things still need to be limited.
That's it.
Right?
Very
true. So
true.
what about if you had to recommend some healthy fats? You talked about the avocado, we talked about nuts. What types of oils do you recommend for people that are looking to follow a heart-healthy diet that want to try to improve their lipid profile?
Olive oil can be a good choice because
it has the highest...
It has a high amount of unsaturated fat in it. And with the monounsaturated fat, what's unique about that is it can help to lower the LDL. So if somebody in particular, when they go and they find their breakdown of the cholesterol and they find out, oh my goodness, my LDL is too high, if they start to increase, you know, some healthy fat in that way, in moderation. Right? Then they can make improvements that way. For individuals that maybe the LDL needs to come down a little bit and maybe they need to make their HDL come up a little bit. I've encouraged people to seek out omega-3 and again, trying to get a source of monounsaturated fat. A nice kind of combination oil for that would be like canola oil, for example. Canola is unique that it has a source of omega-3 in it, whereas olive oil does not. So olive oil, I know, gets a lot of attention.
It does.
It's very highly favored, but canola oil, I feel, is sort of like an unsung hero because it does have the benefit of having the omega-3 in there too.
Exactly. And so when people are looking, if we're sitting here today and we're making recommendations to people saying, all right, so how much fat am I supposed to actually eat a day? You know, there's a certain percentage of fat that we want to in our diet because we know it's important.
Yeah.
And what percentage of that fat should come from calories?
Yeah, it's about 30%.
30%.
And it can vary. It depends on the person's condition. It depends on what's going on with them, but about 30%
Of
is
their
kind of a good
total
place.
calories
Of their
coming
total.
from fat.
Yes.
Okay. And then more specifically, what types of fats should be more liberal, should we be more liberal with, and which ones should we be more restrictive with?
Yeah, and you know, and with that too, I think what'll help the viewers is that when you are looking at the nutrition facts label for any food, and you look at how it says total fat, below it, it always tells you the saturated fat, it always tells you the trans fat. That's what's mandated by FDA, and that was no coincidence. They did that because those are the culprits that are more likely going to affect the bad cholesterol, that LDL, the lousy one that's going to make that number go up. The unsaturated fats, or healthier ones, don't always appear on the label. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't, but the saturated fat and the trans fat in particular always appear on the label, and those are the ones that we want to be careful with. They'll always be listed as the first two fats under the description of total fat too, so that's another way to think of it too.
So like for saturated fat in the diet, we want maybe 7% of your total calories to come from that type of fat. That's about roughly 16 grams of fat from saturated fat a day. And then a total fat amount would be about 65 grams of fat for the entire day, and that's for all your foods. And recognizing that, you know, these we want to be predominantly from the nuts, from the avocado, from peanut butter, different things like this, the healthy fish, all of those things are better choices. And, you know, and then also being mindful that, you know, with anything that you're eating, you want to balance those with other key nutrients too. But peanut butter, you know, you don't need a whole lot of that, but other nut butters, don't spread it on too thick, you know, it adds up really quick. But 65 grams for the day. The Heart Association has a lot of healthy information. You can go to www.heart.org and research all of these things for yourself. It takes about 3 months to see some change with your cholesterol, so don't give up. There's hope, and just keep paying attention to this show and you'll get more information. Want to thank you for being here today, Jennifer. I know this show goes by quick when you're having fun. Time flies. Thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you right here next week on CTN 10.